Welcome to Web of Tomorrow. I'm Adam Garrett Harris. This week we've got Jake Lingwall, who is the author of the Freelancer series, and his new book is Vagrants. And he's also a front-end software engineer at Domo. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. Good to be on.
So, what is your background in programming and then also with writing?
Yeah, so I've been programming since college, basically. I always used computers for sure, but never actually learned how to code until college, and then didn't really learn how to code in a way that people wanted me to until I got my job after college. So I've just been doing front-end development, mostly just JavaScript and HTML and CSS and all that good stuff ever since. So it's been about 5 years since I've been doing that full-time. So been at Domo the entire time, been loving it. It's been treating me well. And then writing is something that I think I've always been interested in. Even as a kid, my favorite classes in school were like writing your own books and stuff. And I was a long-time listener to a number of writing podcasts, and about 4 years ago decided I just kind of wanted to dive in and see if I was any good at it.
Cool. You had classes on writing your own book?
Maybe not classes, but like I mean, I'm talking really, really young here. In like fourth grade, my teacher, Mrs. Sherman, she would have us, as part of our writing assignments, we'd have to like make our own storybooks. And we'd have to, she mixed in our art class too. And I remember like pumping out like 5 of them in the time that everyone else was writing one. And I was like, dude, I love this. I have so many stories to tell. And they were pretty low quality, and they devolved into even lower quality as I started mixing in like classroom jokes and stuff about it. And I actually got banned from reading my stories after about halfway through the year. But yeah, it's always been an interest. Good stories it's hard to put a price on a good story.
So you said you have all these stories to tell. Where do you get those ideas? Where do those stories come from?
I don't know, man. That's a good question. If I could figure out where they came from, maybe I could pull out some of the better ideas from the story cloud. You know, I pretty much always just have my computer all the time because I'm always programming. If I'm not programming, I'm writing. And on my computer, there's a tab I leave open, just a Google Doc called Book Ideas. And I just use it as like, people used to carry on a little notebook and flip it open and write things down. I just put all my ideas in there. And right now I think it's at like 47 pages, I think, of just either ideas or characters or funny phrases I heard, or pretty much anything that I think of as like, oh, that's interesting. I just put it in my Book Ideas book. And then I listen to material about writing, and sometimes that helps bring some of those ideas together. And before too long, I have a decent story going. Nice.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your process? You kind of talked about the idea book. What happens after that?
Yeah. So writing is, it's an interesting thing because it's both similar to programming in a lot of ways, and then totally opposite in the other ways. And I think it's a perfect complement for me. But like kind of like when you're thinking about building an app or building a project on the web, you think of an idea and then maybe you sketch it out with some mocks or something, and then you kind of do an MVP and you play with it a little bit, and then you're like, okay, I kind of like this. Let me make it real, refactor my code or rewrite my code and make it something that's good. And then after that process for a while, you have something that ships, right? And it's actually not too much different for writing a story. I start with those notebook ideas and I write them all down, and I've got, those 47 pages, and I combine some of them together into something I think might work. And then I personally start doing an outline where I'm, mapping out the different things that people do in the story and the different plot events. And once I have the outline, which is kind of my mocks, then I start filling it in. And my first draft is kind of your MVP, which is always the funnest, right? In both programming and and in writing, for sure. The first draft is what's really fun, and then after that, it kind of turns into more work. But after that, I have a pretty unique process. I'll tell you a little bit about a little later, but essentially, I give it to some beta readers that pretty much everyone does, and I get some feedback from them about what worked and what didn't work, and I gather that in a unique way, which is pretty cool. And then I take that feedback, I do another draft, and then sometimes I repeat that process, more readers, another draft, and then after that, I usually try to decide how I'm going to publish it, whether I want to self-publish it or try and sub it out to a traditional New York publisher, the gatekeepers, or there's the publishing world right now is really more open than it was before. There's a lot of different options and a lot of different ways to do things. And so at that point, I'll fill them out. I usually pay for some editing. I pay for some professional cover art. And then I publish it. So it's kind of a long process. It usually takes about a year to get a good book out for me. Although, I mean, that's faster than a lot of writers if you're a George R. Martin fan, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's much shorter than some of the unique indie author space right now, which is, I think, something that would be pretty interesting to talk about later. Just how some people churn books out and their marketing strategies and running it like a business and almost like a TV show where they got to put out a new book every week. So,
wow. Yeah, that seems pretty fast for me for someone who has a full-time job to crank out a book in a year.
Yeah. So my books aren't, they're not Brandon Sanderson's. They're not epic fantasies. I would love to write them that long, but my books are more like the length of, the second or third Harry Potter books in word counts. It's about 60,000 words. So, okay. I mean, it's not terrible. If you write 2,000 words a day for a month, you have a 60,000 word manuscript, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's kind of the traditional starting point right now, or maybe not traditional, but there's a thing called NaNoWriMo that happens every November. And this is actually how I wrote my first novel. Is I saw this and I thought, I can write 2,000 words a day for 30 days. I can do that. And then I can check off my I want to write a book, bucket list item. And so I saw that, and it's really popular online. And they have a great website. You can sign up. You can track your writing each day. And if you hit your goals, you can declare yourself a winner and you get a badge. And it's a really encouraging community, which is something another thing it has in common with, web developers. Most authors are always super happy to help, more competition enter the marketplace. So, NaNoWriMo, 30 days, 2,000 words a day. 2,000 words a day takes me about, on good days where the words are just coming out, I can do it in about an hour and a half. And in bad days, or if I'm watching, too much TV while I'm doing it, it can take me, 4 or 5 hours to get out that many words. Yeah. So not super easy, but it's amazing what you can do if you just, commit to writing a little bit every day. And tracking it has been a big thing that helps me. And
so how do you track it?
I mean, keep plugging, web apps here. It's just, I just use a Google spreadsheet. I've got 4 columns. One is a date that I've just filled in, and then one is the word count at the end of the day. So I just use Microsoft Word, and at the bottom of Microsoft Word, there's a word count. And so I just write what my word count was that day. And then it does a difference against the previous day. It shows me how many words I wrote. And then I have another column that's my goal, which is 2,000 words a day. And I can track it. I usually get about 400 to 500 on weekdays, not too much. And then on weekends, I put a little more time into it. And I usually get about 3,000 or 4,000, which kind of makes up for the lack of writing during the week. Pretty simple process. And that's kind of one of the things that I think writing is a good complement to programming, especially programming at big companies, where there's process and there's revision and time to release, and there's all these kind of barriers between things. When I'm writing, though, it's free. I can do whatever I want. I get the same feeling of being productive that I kind of thrive on, and I sit down and I type, and when I'm done, I'm done. And it's really kind of, in a way, stress relieving, coming from, compiling languages to just throwing words down. Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested in what tools you use. What you said you use Microsoft Word. What else?
What else do you use? So man, you wouldn't believe how much stuff there is in being an independent author these days. I mean, the amount of tools that are available and websites and promotions and editors and people, it was just this huge ecosystem that I guess that's like a lot of marketplaces, right? You're not familiar with, you assume it's going to be simple, and then you look at it and you're like, wow, there are like 50 different bullet points of things I could use here or there, and all these different tools. I use my Google Docs for ideas, and then when I start on a book, I just use Word, and I just write it sequentially. So I take my outline, I write chapter 1, and then I write chapter 2, and I write chapter 3, and it's the kind of the least interesting part of the process is just writing it. And then I don't use too many other tools to write the actual story. I make another document that tracks things I need to fix when I go back and do a draft, because I don't like to, if I'm on chapter 5 and I realize I need to change something in chapter 1, I don't like to go back right then. I just write it down. I finish the story, and then I fix chapter 1 on the next draft. So, I mean, the entry fees on writing a story are so simple. I mean, you could use anything. I just use Microsoft Word because it's kind of the standard, it's what everyone grew up using kind of, and it's what I use now. And sometimes I'll mix in Google Docs if I'm writing. If I can't sleep or I'm somewhere else, I'll write down some paragraphs just in a Google Doc on my phone, and then just copy and paste it into my manuscript later. So I'm pretty lightweight on those initial writing tools.
So as a programmer, are you tempted to bring in all sorts of tools like using version control or some different text editor or building your own tool for something?
I actually have done that quite a bit, and not necessarily in the writing portion, because I find that Microsoft Word works fine. I mean, I'm sure I could use Vim if I had to do my writing, but I'm a pretty horrible speller by default, so it does a good job of taking care of that for me. Yeah. But there are lots of different writing tools and apps you can use. There's some really interesting ones. Some of the popular ones, you can set like a word goal. You have to hit so many words per minute, otherwise it'll start deleting your words that you've written. So it's interesting. I'm not sure that would work for me, but I get distracted too easy. But some writers are like, I can't focus, and then it starts threatening it's going to start deleting my words, and I just keep typing and I don't stop, and I can write a novel in a week and a half that way. So there are some really interesting tools out there. I do a lot more after I've written the story than I do while I'm writing, but it's definitely an interesting space, and there's definitely not a lack of engineers that are writing stories, because you can see these tools popping up all over, different writing aids and different simplified web writing stuff. So it's pretty interesting in all the tools that are there, but I'm kind of a guy, I find something that works and I kind of stick with that. So I haven't explored too far out there. I know Scrivener is the name of probably the second most popular writing tool. So it's an app that has kind of built in like plotting devices and character tracking and word goal tracking and stuff. So that is kind of the big player in the desktop writing software that's specific for authors. But I've taken a look at it a couple times, and Word just works for me. But
that's cool.
One thing that I have built for myself, which is the idea is it was going to be maybe a bigger project, but for now it's just a tool I use for myself. It's actually a pretty good intersection of web development and data analytics, which I work at Domo, and we're a data analytics company. So I think in data in a lot of ways. And I built my own tool for beta readers, which I think is interesting, because the idea behind it was, if I give my book to my mom, she's going to tell me she loves it no matter what. Right? and my little sister, and they're like, oh, it's so good, I love it. And I was like, well, you're not really helpful, and I should find other author friends to people that are non-biased to rip my story apart for me. And I've done that a little bit, but I figured there had to be a way that I could use my connections that I have in real life, people that like me and are willing to support me, and get value out of it as a writer. So I wrote a little web app essentially that just does analytics on how people read my books. So when my mom reads my book now, I track when she's reading it, how fast she's reading it, how long she spends on each page. when she puts it down. And what that does is that creates really interesting charts that I can look at, and I can be like, my mom says she loved this chapter here, but she put the book down 4 times in the middle, or she stopped reading for 2 weeks after she read this chapter. And so I've basically built a tool that's going to help me pull out critical stuff from my mom, who would never tell it to me. So,
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it, actually. It's worked really well for me, especially when you start mixing in, more people reading it, and you start being able to do some really interesting charts. And the dream would be to compare that against how people read really popular books.
Yeah,
and then I could tell at what point. This is the Netflix analogy, right? They know exactly when a viewer, if they reach it to a certain episode or a certain point in the series, that they're highly likely to finish the entire series.
Yeah.
And so Netflix, what they try to optimize their stories and their content so that hook point is as soon as possible. And so I've done some similar stuff trying to identify where the hook point is in my stories, with having people reading it, and it's very interesting. I think the intersection of art, taking the liberties to call my books art, and data and new programming possibilities is just super fascinating to me. Yeah.
There's so many books or movies or shows where people say, well, you have to get at least this far into it before you really get into it. And yeah, with books, that can be a lot of commitment. Like reading can be a lot of work to get that far, and you're not sure if you like it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And the further that is that people have to commit to your book before they like it, the least likely your book is to engage those readers and therefore sell. And the less sales you have, the less likely you're going to have more people reading it and less reviews. And it's a bitter cycle. So yeah, it's very interesting. You listen to these podcasts and great writers talk, and you read these writing books, and they all talk about how the first chapter is supposed to be great, and it's like, yeah, I get that. I know it's supposed to be great. How can I tell if it is great? How can I tell if it's working?
Yeah.
And in web development, we do like A/B testing, and we do analytics, and we test out different strings and different home pages until we find something that's like, oh, boom, there, it's working. Engagement is finally up to where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of doing that with a story is very interesting to me. I know that there are authors that see it purely as art and would say, it's whatever the story, that you shouldn't change your story based off of readers and expectations and stuff. But, I'm actually, I'm interested in entertaining people and having them like my books and telling the best story possible. And to me, good stories are ones that people are engaged in. So I'm highly interested in the idea of using A/B testing and data to write a better story.
Yeah. So was your first book Freelancer? Is that one you wrote during NaNoWriMo?
Yeah. So that's the story. What year was that now? 2013.
Published 2015 is what it said on Goodreads.
Yeah. So I think I wrote it in November, which is NaNoWriMo 2013. And I started with I didn't quite have my book idea spreadsheet at that time, but I had seen a lot of YA movies lately, so young adult movies, Hunger Games, Divergent, all those things, and kind of wanted to do something different, and I wanted to write about some of my ideas about how the future would look with 3D printing and drones and the economy. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna write about this. I had started a book before, about 6 months before that, and I had given up because I didn't believe in it after I got into it a few weeks. And so I was determined to finish it. So I signed up, did NaNoWriMo, did 2,000 words a day, cranked through it. I was writing during the football games and pie on Thanksgiving, trying to get my story finished. But I did it. I finished. I had 60,000 and like 25 words. So
Nice.
my story ended exactly on budget and on time. And so I sent that off to my trusty beta readers, my mom and my little sister. And they read it, and they said it was good. And I was like, well, of course you're going to say it's good because, you're my mom and you love me. She's a great mom. And, that was kind of it. I was like, okay, I did it. I wrote this book. That's fine. I was still interested in writing, but you listen to these other stories about how people say you have to write 1 million words before you're any good at writing. And I was like, 1 million words? That's a lot of books. That's like 15 freelancers, basically.
Yeah.
And so I didn't touch it too much then. And sometimes still to this day, I go from writing a lot to programming more, and I go back and forth. But I didn't touch Freelancer at all. In fact, I assumed it would just be my checklist item. I wrote this book, I'm done with it. But then 6 months later, my little sister was like, hey, that book, I've been thinking about Freelancer. At the time it was called, I think I had named it Printed Drones for 3D printed drones.
Oh,
I didn't have a very good name. But she started asking me about it, and I was like, oh, that's nice of you to ask about it. And then a couple months later, she asked about it again, and she's like, look, I read a lot, and I've seen a lot of books, and I actually think your story's pretty good. Like, you should have someone check it out. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I opened it up, and I did another draft, and I didn't quite know how to fix anything because I didn't know what any of the problems were. So I was just kind of guessing on how I could make the story better. And some people are naturals, They're like the people that can, play a piano by ear. They hear a song and they're like, oh, yes, I can play it. And I'm definitely not that natural writer. So I'm still learning how to fix stories, but I did my best job. And then I sent Freelancer. I renamed it Freelancer at that point, and I sent it off to a few more people. And they actually all gave me pretty positive feedback too. And these were still my friends and acquaintances, but they weren't my mom. So, I give people a hard time. I was expecting to get some hard time back, but they kind of liked it. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. And at this point it was, I think, maybe December of the next year where I was like, okay, I could do something with this. And that's when Amazon launched a new program called Kindle Scout, which I was really interested in. The basic premise is that you submit your book to them, and then they'll put it on their website where people can read the first 3 chapters or so. And they put it up there, and people read it, and if people like it, they'll nominate it. So they'll basically vote for it to get published. And then after 30 days on that service, they'll take a few more days and make a final decision on whether they want to basically give you a contract. And it's a contract for only ebooks, so they don't do any paperbacks, they don't do anything like that. But you do get a little bit of money. I think the deal is $1,500 in an advance, which is great. $1,500. Who can't use that much money?
Yeah.
And I got really excited about that because I was like, traditional publishers, they're probably not going to love it. And I sent out to a few of them just in case. In case one of the big Tor or Random House or these really big publishers from New York wanted it. And I sent it out, and I kept watching Kindle Scout for a couple months. And then when my book was rejected by the bigger firms, I was like, I'm going to put it on Kindle Scout. I'm just I'm going to put it up. This will, if nothing else, be a way to get people I have no connection to read it and tell me if they like it. And so I put it on the Kindle Scout campaign, which is like 30 days of. It was super stressful for me because if you get votes, your book is in the hot and trending list. And so I was trying to, round up votes, get my family. At the time I was teaching programming at a boot camp, and I was having my programming students vote for it. And I was having people at work vote for it. I was people at church, anyone I could find, I was trying to convince them to vote for it. Just trying to stay in the hot and trending and get as many votes as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked out at the end of 30 days. I got an email saying they had accepted it, and they wanted to give me a contract, and they were going to publish it. And I was blown away.
Nice.
It was the first book I had ever finished, and I figured no one would ever read it, but put some work into it, and it came out all right. And it was kind of funny because after the Kindle Scout process, I've been in it a few years. I'm pretty sure their voting system is just a way to get you to drive fans to their website. It's a viral marketing strategy, right?
Yeah.
Which is very smart. Hats off to them for doing it. But they actually do have editors that read the entire book before they decide whether they want to offer you representation or not, or give you a contract. So not only, I mean, someone liked it is what I'm trying to say. Someone at Amazon, one of their imprints, liked my book enough to give me a contract, which was a big accomplishment to me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so then that was selected in, I think, March of 2015. And then at the time, for Kindle Scout, you have to submit a cover. And I tried to make my own cover, and it was in Sketch. I didn't even have Photoshop or Illustrator. I made it in Sketch.
In Sketch?
Yeah. It was, I was proud of it at the time, but it's not something I should be proud of. But, you know, hey, it helped me win the Kindle Scout campaign. But they were like, basically, you know, we need a new cover. And I said, okay, great. Can you guys do that for me? And they did, thankfully. They made me a new cover, which was awesome. It was kind of a matrixy thing with some eyes on it. It was a little weird. Didn't really like fit the book that much because it's Matrix implies kind of like darker simulation world villains, and this is kind of a lighter YA story. Sure, there's a civil war that breaks out, and she does a lot of programming, and she can, you know, step into immersive programming environments, but it's not like anything super sinister or anything. But I ended up changing the cover again. I commissioned some custom artwork for about $1,000 from a artist that had done some work for some big name authors, which is the current cover you can see now on Amazon, which is Carrie, the main character, with some small drones flying around her.
Yeah, I like that much better.
Yeah, me too. I wish if I could go back, I would definitely have spent the money first, because the covers are what sell books. Absolutely. Anyone that says don't judge a book by a cover is wrong, because everyone judges a book by a cover. So you have to have a good cover. Have to.
But yeah, I mean, looking at the first cover, I wouldn't have known any better. Like it's a cool cover. The second one is just so much better.
Yeah, and there's some ways it could go. Like the topography is a little light, a little uninteresting. You know, if I were to do it now that I've been writing for a few years now, I've got 5 books published and another one coming out on Monday from the time we're recording this. So yeah, I think what I know about the industry has changed a lot. And like I said, it's so much more advanced than just writing a story, especially if you're going to do self-publishing or a hybrid publishing, kind of like Kindle Scout represents. So there's a lot there, and it took me 6 months from being selected to being released. And then ever since, it's kind of been out on the store. I wrote 2 more in that Freelancer series, finished it. They're all pretty small books. I have I think 117 reviews right now with a 4.5 star average, which blows me away. And I've sold about 5,000 copies of Freelancer total, I believe.
Nice.
So not an insignificant number. Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, not enough that, you know, I'm making money off of it. I think last month my check for Freelancer was like $30 or something like that. So, I mean, not a huge amount of money, but to think that there's 5,000 people out there in the world that have read my story and have, you know, experienced my hard work, and hopefully a good portion of them enjoyed it. But even if they didn't, the research and the data on how narratives are so important to, you know, the way we see the world and we treat each other and everything about being human, to think that my narrative has influenced 5,000 people, it's pretty crazy. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, books are one of the most influential things in my life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can trace stories back, and just you can see the effects they've had on the world. You know, like how To Kill a Mockingbird changed the way that so many people viewed, you know, race relations in the country. And I mean, there's so many examples of that throughout time, and the importance of us, you know, passing down stories from generation to generation. And it's really cool. The power of narratives are something that I didn't realize were so like incredible back when I started writing, but like any good marketer now will be like, you know, you got to tell a story. Your product needs to tell a story. This advertisement needs to tell a story that people can connect to and empathize with. So it's yeah, books are an awesome form of telling a story.
So you mentioned in Freelancer that you wanted to tell the story set in this setting with all this technology, like drones and 3D printing. So I've had that same kind of impulse too, but my problem is that all I want to do is kind of the world building aspect, and I have no characters, no plot.
Hey, that doesn't sound too far off from my stories, man. It's an art form, and like any art form, it's a lot more work than you think, and you've got to train yourself a lot more than you think. But I agree with you. The world building by far is my favorite part, and most of my 40-page book idea is just really interesting worlds, and I have a hard time developing unique characters as well, but I like to think I'm getting better as I just practice. Practicing anything gets you better, hopefully.
So did you work on Freelancer exclusively, like the first 3 books, without working on any other ideas at the same time?
That's a good question. I have my book idea list, and sometimes, the latest idea will get 2 or 3 pages of world building while I'm writing a story. In fact, I'm just finishing a story now, which I haven't told anyone about. The working title is Alec, and I'm just finishing it now, and I actually stopped writing another book in the middle because this idea was taking so much of my mind naturally. Like I just wanted to keep world building it, but I was like, if I don't write this thing, it's gonna seep into these other books where it does not belong. But typically I try to just do one story at a time. In fact, the best thing you can do to learn how to write is just to finish a story. So that's why NaNoWriMo is so good, because you start a story and you just finish it. Like even no matter how bad the first chapters are, how much work you need to do, you just finish it. And so that's typically what I like to do with my stories. I really only like to write one book at a time.
Okay.
I have a hard enough time trying to make my characters sound unique within a single story, and trying to juggle that across stories is hard. Even when I finish writing one book and I start writing the next, say a month later, like I'll still by default be using characters from the last book's name, because I'm used to typing out their names kind of in my muscle memory.
Yeah.
So I have to go through and check my Word document at the end, find and replace any characters from my last book.
I mean, how do you find the motivation to focus on one thing at a time and to actually finish?
That's the kind of the hard thing about doing anything, right? Like
yeah.
anything of significant quality is just going to take a lot of work. Whether it's programming or it's writing. Like I said earlier, they're similar in a lot of ways. And it is at a certain point, maybe there's people that just love every aspect of programming, or they love every aspect of writing, and they can't get enough of first drafts and second drafts and third drafts and fourth drafts and fifth drafts. All of it are the same. To me, there's definitely a diminishing return every time I have to read through my own book. So at first, doing the first draft is, like I said, it's fun. I really enjoy it. I unwind. I can write words. I can just tell stories. I can have a good time. That part is really easy. In fact, it takes very little dedication, besides if I'm trying to hit a word goal. Like if I have to hit 2,000 words a day, that feels a little bit like work, because I have to hit my goal. But if I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to write today, and I'm going to write till I want to stop, and I write 500 words, that's fine. That's fine. I do that all the time. But the determination to keep going on like the third or fourth draft is hard. I mean, it feels like work sometimes. As much as I don't want to say that, it kind of feels like you're working for somebody, and your new boss is this book, and you're like, wait a minute, what have I done? Now I'm a slave to my own sunk costs on my story.
Yeah.
But deadlines help, goals help. Little things help, especially as you're a newer writer. Every time someone leaves a non-malicious review, something that doesn't attack me personally for being such a horrible writer, every time I get a somewhat positive review, it's a little boost. I'm like, okay, someone's out there. Greg R. from Amazon gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and he said he liked my book. I mean, Greg R. wants the sequel. I got to write it for him.
Yeah.
It's tough. I think another thing that really helps with that is managing the sizes of your projects.
Okay.
like, I think, if you read epic fantasy, there's a lot of writers, Robert Jordan wrote 13 novels in his story. And it's like, okay, I want to do that. I want to write 13 stories. I'm going to plan this huge thing out. And man, series are hard. They are hard. After you write the first book and you're like, oh, I got to write 2 more, let alone 12 more.
And Freelancer wasn't planned on being a series, was it?
No. It was planned on being a standalone. In fact, I would highly recommend, if you're thinking about doing writing, this is what publishers are looking for. They're looking for a standalone first novel with series potential.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a hard thing to do, but I think the readers enjoy it better. Books that are obviously planned as a series sometimes don't have satisfying endings, and I don't think that's really fair to readers. I don't do cliffhangers. Hopefully we'll never do cliffhangers. I might if someone tells me I have to, but I like writing stories that are complete and have their own message and their own theme and their own, plot lines. So yeah, I wrote Freelancer as an individual book, and I didn't plan on doing a sequel until I got picked in Kindle Scout. And then I was like, wow, Kindle Scout, this could really take off, like Amazon is behind it. Mm-hmm. And I got a little, starry eyed. I'm like, whoa, the contract says if I don't make $25,000 back in the first 5 years, then I get the rights to my novel back for free automatically. And I'm like, $25,000. Wow. My book is going to be like $2. So that's going to be like 50,000 copies, so I'm like, well, if 50,000 people read my book, I definitely want to give them a sequel. It hasn't turned out to be anywhere near that successful for me. Other Kindle Scout authors have. But like I said, I've sold about 5,000 copies, but I wanted to tell another story for those people that supported my Kindle Scout campaign. And it kind of, I had another idea that fit in the world really well. Something I wanted to write about. The sequel is more focused on a kind of a group of hackers that get together and trying to have their own hacker utopia type of thing. And that was just a fun idea. And yeah, the success of the first book getting chosen pushed me into a second book. And in the second book, I realized that story wasn't going to tie up the main character's story. And so there had to be a third one. So that's where the trilogy came from for Freelancer. And I'm glad I wrote them. I really like the story arcs over the whole trilogy. I like that they're all unique and they all have their own. They're all kind of self-containable. In fact, if you read the second one, you would probably not even know there was a first one before it, really, because it explains its references back to its previous books when it's needed. And they're not, like I said, they're not super complex. They're written for a young adult crowd.
Okay.
But yeah, it's that one grew from a standalone into a series, and the next book I wrote was called Epic Shift. And that was an idea that came from just camping in the mountains around my home. I was in a canyon, and I couldn't shake the idea of how cool it would be if there was hundreds of thousands of people that lived in this canyon, like giant Machu Picchu type of thing, and that led to, combined with a few of my other ideas from my notebook about colonizing another world and what happens if you lose all your technology, and then how your stories from one generation to the next are changed. And I started pulling all these together, these ideas, and I really like the idea of like phoenixes, and I was like, phoenixes are cooler than dragons. I'm gonna write a story with like a big fiery bird, and all those ideas kind of came together, and that became Epic Shift. And I was really excited about it, and I put it on Kindle Scout. My first 2 books were published through Kindle Scout. They did not publish the third one because it turns out they decided they pretty much only like to do standalone novels, and they didn't consider book 3 to be standalone. So I self-published book 3 of the Freelancer series, but I put Epic Shift up on Kindle Scout, and I got way more votes than I did with my Freelancer campaign, and I got way more hours hot and trending, and they didn't pick it, which was, that's just how publishing works. Like I said, the editor probably read it, and the story didn't connect with him, and or it didn't fit their slots. It's a fantasy novel, and I previously wrote sci-fi, and I've written sci-fi ever since. And so, maybe it didn't fit with that editor or didn't fit with their lineup at the time, but, it didn't get selected, and that was kind of a bummer. And so I just put that one out. I self-published it like a week after they rejected it because it has a really nice cover. Like the artwork was done by, I think, some guy from Britain. I can't remember his name. And I definitely paid for that way too soon. I should have waited until the currency dropped a bit with Brexit. But yeah, so that book was another story. I self-published it, and it only has, I think, 11 reviews. It's been out for a year. So I've only sold a couple hundred copies of that.
Yeah.
So that book has not been a success. In fact, I wanted to write that as a series. I wanted to write it as a time jumping series. So I wanted the first books to be basically 1,000 years after the crash. And then I wanted the next books to be a couple hundred years after that. And I wanted to play with the ideas of, the people from the first book are now the legends of the people in the second book, and kind of just do this cascading time thing, which I think is a really interesting idea, but it didn't sell any copies. It hasn't found a readership. I put it on free promotions a few times, and it's been downloaded a few thousand times, but it just doesn't seem to have connected with anybody. And so at this point, I've moved on. I don't plan on revisiting that world or that series again, which is an interesting decision. It kind of links back to your series question. Yeah, I'm not proud of it, but I cut off the story. I was like, I'm not passionate enough about this story now to write a sequel if no one wants to read it. So yeah, I have two series that are released, and one of them is one book, and will likely never get another volume unless I feel like just become really passionate about an idea in that world and I want to write it. But as of right now, I have no intentions to visit it again. So.
And then you have another one coming out really soon?
Yeah, so this is another thing. Like I said, manage the expectations of your series. This one is called Vagrants, and it is going to be a 3-book series. And this is the one that really taught me that series are hard, because I finished the first book and I'm really happy with it. I'm really excited about it. I think it's very cool. This is the first one that I really used my beta reading app on, where I could follow people's data, and I use that to improve the story, and it just does some really, really cool things. The story I'm excited about. And I finished book 1. I'm like, okay, I got to write book 2, and I got to write book 3. And I've actually made the covers for them, and I've put them up on Amazon for pre-order, but they're not finished yet. And now I'm like, oh man, that's a lot of work ahead of me.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work ahead of me. I've just given myself two book deadlines before I've even launched the first one.
Yeah.
So this one I'm committed to finishing, because the story needs to be finished with 3 books. I can't cut it off like I did with my fantasy series. But yeah, I got a big launch coming up on Monday. This one I'm totally self-publishing. I didn't even send it to Kindle Scout. I sent it to some publishers. Once again, they're not interested, and we can talk about the significance of that. I think is something that's very interesting as well.
Okay.
But I'm self-publishing it, so it's going to be available on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, Google Books, Kobo, basically everywhere. And when you self-publish, you just have a lot more control over pricing and promotions and launch strategies and marketing. So this is the first book that I'm launching is in a planned launch. It's been on pre-order for a couple months. It has a strong number of pre-orders already. On launch week, which is next week, I have a bunch of promotional websites and newsletters lined up. So this is kind of my first real self-publishing launch that I think is probably going to be an educational experience. But my goal is to probably have about 20,000 downloads in the first week, which is way more ambitious than anything I've done before. So
is this one young adult?
No, this one is an adult book. I wrote it for an adult audience, and I mean the lines between those are not as solid as you think.
Yeah, I read plenty of young adult.
Yeah, young adult has like no content advisory. Like you can have anything in there, but it generally has themes to do with like coming of age or dealing with parents or family or society, and it usually has younger protagonists, right? Usually teenage protagonists are the cutoff, but so yeah, this one has like a 25-year-old or 26-year-old protagonist, so it's kind of outside that age range, and it's a little more adult. There's more violence. There's more death than my previous books. Given who I am and my background, it's still fairly clean, so it might not be considered what some people think to be adult with lots of real world heavy language and sex scenes and stuff like that. But this is my first book written for an older audience, and it's got some pretty heavy stuff in there. This is the first book that I've written where there was a chapter, I wrote it and I was like, man, that actually affected me. Like I felt kind of bad after I wrote it.
Oh man.
Because not like because it was, like icky or goreography or something. It was just, it's heavy stuff. Yeah. It was heavy stuff and it affected me. And I was like, wow, that's either a good sign or a really bad sign. But based off of, my scoring and my analytics and my app, people have responded to it very well, or at least very powerfully. I don't say well, but eliciting an emotional reaction from some words you've written, like if you think about that, is something that is just wild, right? You're like changing people's moods and their brains and their feelings based off some words you put down on a piece of paper.
Yeah, you don't do that with some lines of code whenever your coworker reads your code.
Hey, I have coworkers that have been known to have very strong reactions to seeing my code. Most of it are tears or swear words, but. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something totally different. It's I think you could get that in programming if you deliver someone like an incredible experience, I think that it's possible, but man, yeah, totally different.
So tell us about this Jacob Walling guy.
Jacob Walling.
Yeah, it looks like he just came out with a book. And and you got a quote on the cover, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I did get the opportunity to cover quote on Jacob Walling, who is quite the author character. He was someone that did a NaNoWriMo last year and wrote a book, and maybe, I don't want to speak for him. I don't want to speak for Jacob Walling because I'm just Jake Lingwall. But he wrote a book that maybe he wasn't super proud of, but he wrote it and he wanted to put it out and he thought it was funny. But other people might not think it was funny, is what he told me. And so he just wanted to establish that under his own name. And I've just been facilitating that process for him by showing him the ropes a little bit of self-publishing. And he has some really interesting reviews on that first one. A lot of interesting editorial reviews. Someone said it better than I could. I read the book. I was cover quoted on the book, saying that it offended me on several levels. And a reader whose name I can't remember left an Amazon review for that said it was trash, but beautiful trash.
That's the best kind of trash.
Yeah, it's certainly my favorite kind of trash. So that was kind of fun to see. It's been an interesting experience helping Jacob Walling try to get off the ground in the publishing space.
Nice.
But,
yeah, I'll have to keep an eye on him.
Yeah. He doesn't have his own website, so sometimes he posts content through mine, which is jakenotjacob.com. In case there was any confusion, there's not a whole lot there, but that's
I could see the confusion. Yeah.
Yeah, Jacob Walling is not. I wouldn't call him an upcoming author. If there was the opposite of upcoming, as in somehow he was going to achieve less than he already has, then that's Jacob Walling's future, I think.
So how can people find you online and find your books?
So people can find me online. I'm not too hard to find. There's not very many Jake Lingwalls in the world. So my Freelancer books and my Epic Shift book are available exclusively on Amazon. My new Vagrants story that's coming out is going to be available on all those digital ebook stores, and you can also order paperback copies of any of my books on Amazon. You can find me there. I tweet occasionally, usually about sports or something that's going on in my personal life. Not a great Twitter follow. And then I have my website, Jake Not Jacob. I don't do too much there, but I do have a newsletter that I send updates, usually free copies of my books to everyone that's on the newsletter. So if you're interested in seeing my stories, that's where you can find them. Like I said, Vagrants launches September 18th. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's a good story. I would absolutely love to hear from anybody that listened to this podcast. If you give Vagrants a try, I would love to have you tell me, like, you know, some of those analytics things, like if you read it, you know, what you thought of it. If you read the first couple pages and couldn't get into it, I would love to absolutely hear, see, hey, Jake, I listened to the podcast, and you know, I read your first few pages and I couldn't get into it. I would absolutely love to hear that.
So thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for talking about programming, writing, and I definitely want to check out your new book.
Oh, absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to talk writing anytime. And as a closing thought, if you're out there and you've considered writing a book, just do it. Just put down a few hundred words a day and do it consistently for a while, and just finish that first story, and you probably won't regret it. You likely won't make very much money from it, but I think you'll enjoy the experience. Yeah,
and NaNoWriMo is coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, November. You should do it. You should sign up. Let me know if you're doing it. I'll do it too.